Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Aaron Ferguson, and this is Citizens Review, where we keep the show accurate, independent, and bold. Before we begin tonight's show, I want to carry you on a journey of sorts, back to when our country first became an independent nation, the 10th of July, 1973. It was then that we as Bahamians had our first glimpse of light, yes, our first ray of hope, shining through the abyss of an uncertain future. Nonetheless, as the newest Bahamian citizens, independence gave us all a reason to extend the blindness of our faith with the embrace of a newfound vision of hope. Hope that for the first time made us dare to believe that we ourselves could possibly be something more. To all of us, 1973 marked that epoch where what we once thought to be unbelievable came into fruition, and it made us all believers of the unbelievable. Not to suggest that all of us were crazy back then, but to simply say that it was then, as a people, that we realized that something great not only happened around us, but something great happened within us. Within our hearts, we climbed to the mountaintop. We conquered our fears and surmounted our doubts. So back then, without a shadow of a doubt, we courageously dared to begin to believe that our sons and daughters would one day become great men and great women, so that our loving and caring mothers could tear down that clapboard house and live in a blockhouse, just like them people she used to work for. Our strong and hard-working papa, with his hard-working hands and his strong back, could have the integrity of a name and a legacy. So then assuredly, and you well know the story, we pressed forward, upward, onward, together to reach that light. But now, as it seems, as we've made these baby steps into the 21st century, the light that was once glaring ahead of us so bright, our beacon of hope, our promise of a better tomorrow, has now become the light behind us. And what does any light behind you create? Well, it almost always creates a shadow of darkness ahead of you. This is what happens when a nation has a reflection of a past that seems brighter than its future. Our hearts begin to be filled with the shadows of doubt that some 30 years earlier we had surmounted. What I'm trying to tell you, my brothers and sisters, is that as a nation, it cannot be built on simply the foundations of hope. A nation built on hope is like a house built on sands. And like we saw with the tornadoes that hit our dear Grand Bahama, you cannot just build on sand. Because when the storms and the strong winds come, it'll all be swept away. We have to build this Bahama land on solid rock, out of some blocks. And any contractor anywhere in this Bahamas will tell you, sand is not the only ingredient you put in when you're making concrete. Yes, we need the sands of hope, of course, but we also need the lime of agriculture. We need the flowing waters of education, the cement of national security, the rock of faith, and of course, we ought not forget that during this blessed Holy Week, we have to mention that we need that ever-present grace of the potter's hand to mold it all together. Now, that's how you make concrete. The Bahamas then, just like some of these young fellas you see walking around with their pants stuck into their socks, is finding itself at the latter end of puberty. And in order for us to mature as a nation, we must grasp at concreteness, at manhood and womanhood of national sovereignty. It is time we shed away this independent dependency and create the upward movement towards national sovereignty. This is why this show is the first part of a series entitled The Bahamas from 1973 to 2010, Making the Transition from Independent Dependency to National Sovereignty. Yes, I can see some of you watching from the comforts of your living rooms and bedrooms, asking yourselves the question, what is national sovereignty? Listen, quit the puzzling expression. Don't hurt your head, and that's why we're here at Citizens Review. Not only do we ask the tough questions you want to be asked, to get the answers we need to hear, but every now and then, Citizens Review, to citizen, we will put the tough questions to you, to make you think just a little bit deeper of something that ordinarily, otherwise, you wouldn't have thought of. And then we can all say, like the children say, that's a why. Now and then, to your question, national sovereignty, let me begin with what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean that we isolate ourselves from the region or the rest of the world. It simply means that at a world table, we got to get down to the good stuff, which means as a nation, we have the capacity to exercise choice from a position of strength rather than as we do now from a position of weakness. So instead of this independent dependency, we have that now, where we have America sneezing and we catch a cold. We would have some immunity. Is that unreasonable to expect? I want to hear from you. Email us at citizensreviewtv@gmail.com, or you can find us on Facebook at Citizens Review. Speaking of which, we have some interesting comments that we'll read later on in the show. Our guest this week to talk about agriculture is the famous George Washington Carver of the Bahamas, who wrote the book, The New Caribbean, A Region in Transition, Godfrey Enyus. And we also have the grower from Lucayan Tropical, Mr. Tim Hauber. We welcome you back to the show right after this break. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. We have our guests here, and we're getting ready to have our conversation about national sovereignty with relation to agriculture. First up, Tim Hauber, the grower from Lucayan Tropical, and Godfrey Enyus, now author Godfrey Enyus. We know him as agriculturalist, to talk about his book and also to have this conversation with me. Gentlemen, y'all know how we do it on this show if you've watched it, so I want to start with the first question. The business of agriculture in the Bahamas has just about died. And that's not by happenstance. That has to be for a reason. What is the reason, and is the reason suggesting to us that agriculture shouldn't be sustainable in the Bahamas? Did it just die because people just closed their farms, or did it die because the world market outpaced us, and it will continue to do that? So the plight of you two is pretty much lost.
It died for two reasons.
Okay.
One reason, bad policies. And the second reason is that there's a lack of understanding of the role agriculture plays in nation building and on the issue of national sovereignty.
Okay.
And I think from those two perspectives, those in the political directorate have missed the game. And it is not only symptomatic of the Bahamas. It is the reason why I wrote the book, because it is a regional problem. And it is a regional problem which has really taken hold during the independence era.
So why hasn't private industry been able to, and Tim, you can get in on this, been able to push back on that policy to show that there are jobs that can be created, that agriculture is in fact sustainable, and we need to feed ourselves?
We live in Mr. Ferguson, in a import-dominated society.
Agreed.
The food importer dominates the economy.
The distributors, the
Right,
big distributor boys.
And they have been able to influence public policy in this area, particularly those who control the tourism industry. And that is the story throughout the region.
So Tim, you're in the business. Lucayan Tropical currently uses hydroponics.
Correct.
And other methods by which to compete. You're on the ground, you're in the Bahamas, you have a greenhouse. Is it sustainable? Is it working? Can agriculture provide the food necessary to feed Bahamians?
I believe we can.
Okay.
I really do. It's a challenging environment, and the legislation and policy certainly have a strong influence on the industry. So I do believe we can grow a lot of our own food, and the issue of growing it efficiently and the issue of growing it profitably is certainly a challenge, and,
yes.
and we do need to move forward on several different levels to maintain that efficiency. It's a globalized world now, and we can't keep our head in the sand and think somehow we are going to have a unique situation where our government's going to protect the farmers. We are in several free trade agreements now, and that is the reality of the current state of affairs. But if you delve into the meat of some of those agreements, they were written in such a way, there is an awareness that we need to preserve agriculture in these small countries and islands. It was not written in such a way to try destroy agriculture and to try sort of pull the lifeblood out of our country. There is a lot of legislation in place in those agreements that is there to protect a certain level of agriculture. We as an industry and as a government need to be doing our research to understand how to then take advantage of that.
Okay.
And so I do believe we can grow it. I know we can grow it. We've grown it in the past. We need to have the vision, and we need to be very clear on understanding the free trade agreements and that we are now part of.
Dr. Enyus, in your book you identified that a significant part of agriculture to the Caribbean is the post-Haitian Revolution, where Haiti before that had served for some 50% of coffee growth and some 30 to 40% of sugar growth.
Some 30% of the French foreign exchange earning,
Okay.
Haiti was responsible for. Haiti was a major agribusiness center.
Okay.
It was the pearl of the region, and it was the main source. Like I said, 30% of the French foreign exchange earnings.
Okay. Let me ask you this question, and this question goes to both of you from either angle. How did we get to the point where we could say that let me pose a position, if tomorrow the Pentagon, the White House, and some other buildings are blown up by terrorists, and world shipping freezes, let's say for 1 month, because this situation is more grave than we've seen before, the Bahamas would, in that 1 month space, run out of food, definitely run out of food, and get close to the kind of situation that we see in Haiti. The buildings won't be broken down, but the people will be hungry. We'll start to run the streets, start to scavenge for food, but the food will be nowhere to be found.
That's an easy question to answer.
But my question is, how could the policymakers be so silly? Are they delusional? Is Larry Cartwright in agriculture crazy? Something wrong with him, or is there something more to the issue?
There's something more
what's
to the
the
issue.
real problem?
There's something more to the issue. There's a book called The Bad Samaritans. And in The Bad Samaritans, the author is a Korean, he mentioned what is called the unholy trio. The IMF, the World Bank,
and the Inter-American Development Bank?
And the WTO.
Ah, okay.
Right? He calls them the unholy trio. And the reasons for that, prior to the WTO, you had what is called the GATT agreement, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. Mm-hmm. Many of the developing countries went to the table when GATT was initiated. All right? In 1986, John Block, who was the Secretary of Agriculture during the Reagan administration,
in the U.S.,
right, made a statement, right, that it was unnecessary for developing countries like the Bahamas to even think about growing food. The view was that the Americans and the Europeans could supply the world with food. You see, in the 50s, they developed a system which was called low cost, high output, right? Where they put the family farm in the U.S. out of business. And you had these mega multinational corporations coming on stream.
So what that did...
Let me go further,
was
right?
put the family farms in the islands out of business.
And put the family farms on. And about 3 weeks ago, President Clinton apologized to the world.
Yes, he did.
Right? For the policies of his administration.
They were the hallmark of his administration.
Right, which devastated small farming, not only in the Caribbean, in Africa, and in the Pacific. So it was these kinds of policies, right, which our governments fell prey to, and they had this notion that it was cheaper to import than to grow.
So, okay, so we've identified those policies.
Right.
But Tim Harbor is a grower at Lucayan Tropical that exists today.
Right.
These governments are now empowered. They can see that that is a problem. They just signed on to EPA with some similar types of stipulations, I'm sure. Why is it that Lucayan Tropical can't receive the kinds of concessions that it needs to be successful?
The unholy trio has now recognized, right, that the policies of the past were policies of folly, right? And so now they've devised a new policy called food security, right? Meaning that countries have to develop the capacity to grow their food. So as a result of that, entities like Lucayan Tropical can now have the potential to survive.
Now, Tim, give us the real story. I hear that, but we've been down to Lucayan Tropical. I visited. You showed us everything that you provide, and you talked to us about the duties, the concessions, challenges. You showed us a tractor that basically you receive no help with in terms of concession to purchase. What is that really coming about? Or are you still struggling in the same kind of Bahamas that are still victim or prey to policies of the unholy trio? Are you still victim or prey to that? I think so. I don't see farming coming about like it should be.
I agree with what Godfrey's saying, that I really believe that those policies shook the world and we got shaken with it, and the farmers just didn't know how to adjust, and slowly went out of business or became subsistence type farmers, even though they had capability of growing quite a bit more. And so I agree with what he's saying, and I believe that the world is starting to wise up that it's not a good idea to sort of suck that sort of lifeblood out of these smaller countries.
Let me give you an example where he is right. There's a province in China called the Shandong province.
Okay.
They have 200,000 Lucayan Tropicals. 200,000. In Dominica, which is just south of us, they have 200, not of the high technology like that, but they have 200. In Jamaica, right, one of the things that FAO is pushing, this kind of
and
operation.
we have one in
we got one or two, maybe the Ridge Farm, which is run by Ms. Cadet, right? Right, one or two. But you see, here again, where there's no vision,
the people will
perish.
So Tim, give us some more of the details. What are some of the particular struggles that you have running a farm?
Well, the reality is we're on an island, that everything needs to be imported, or a lot of the material I need to use to run the farm, certainly a more modern farm like a greenhouse, has to be imported. And so that does incur a certain level of extra cost. And so it's not, so it's expensive to run a modern farm. And the government has some policy in place that allows registered farmers to bring in certain items duty-free that will be used for that farming operation. And the reality is, the list that I have that I need to run a hydroponic greenhouse is several hundred items long. Like it's quite, and there's about 17 of those that are on the current list that is allowed in duty-free. So that means the other 73 items that I need to bring in, I'm charged duty on those. Or I go through a certain procedure where you write a letter to the Minister of Agriculture, that they decide if it's acceptable or not. They then move that over to Ministry of Finance. Minister of Finance then reviews it and decides if it's acceptable or not, sends it back to Ministry of Agriculture, and eventually it makes it back to me several months later, at which point the goods have been sitting on the dock for quite a long time.
Yeah, you up and down the dilly tree, as they call it.
And the reality is, I'm still being charged. So instead of being charged 40%, I'll be charged 10% duty. But I still pay duty on items that are really intended to be brought in duty-free to support farmers. And so that's one struggle. That is just like, come on, guys. We already have enough challenges trying to operate on a small island. Yeah. And in theory, we are supporting farmers by removing duty. But in reality, I'm still paying duty on these items.
But on almost 100 items.
A long list.
Yeah. Here it goes again. It's policy. Let me tell you why it's policy. The largest agribusiness in the Caribbean, what would you think it is?
Boy, I couldn't tell you.
Poultry. Poultry is the largest agribusiness in the region.
You were talking about that in your book.
It is
Poultry Association.
Right, it's a $500 million industry. And it's all based on imports. They have to bring in the corn, they got to bring in the molasses, they got to bring in the baby chicks, right? But they've been able to do it with technology, right? And it has become the largest it's larger than sugar, it's larger than cocoa, it's larger than anything. It's the largest agribusiness in the region. And if they can make it competitive, and they're further south than we are,
then we should be able to compete.
Right? And the other fact is, what is so interesting about this whole idea about competitiveness, they've been able to incorporate the small farmer. The same small farmer who people say are inefficient, right? And we should do away with. The Caribbean Poultry Association has been able to incorporate the small farmer in this gigantic agribusiness.
All right, Dr. Enyus, we'll be right back with Dr. Enyus and Tim Halber. We're going to talk about demystifying this idea that farming is just some people that are undereducated out in the fields picking cotton. That's not what it's about. We're going to talk about some of those issues when we come right back after this break. Back to the conversation with Godfrey Enyus and Tim Halber from Lucayan Tropical. Godfrey Enyus is the author of the book that we have here, The New Caribbean, A Region in Transition. Gentlemen, during the break we talked about BAPA. Tim, give us what your idea is that the farmers should do. What should happen?
Well, we talked earlier about sort of the mess that we're in, and we've looked at the policies that feel that are actually working against us. It's time for us as the farming industry, as the farmers, to pull our socks or pull our pants out of our socks, pull together and say, here's our vision. We know we can do this. It's not insurmountable. We only need 180 acres of cabbage. We need 250 acres of green peppers. We can do that.
This is in order to feed the Bahamas.
Exactly. In order to match our current import I
Give
think
me,
last
give
year
me
or the
some
year
of
before.
those numbers. You need
108. This is coming from a report that MINS did from Ministry of Agriculture, statistician. It's like 180 acres of cabbage.
can feed the Bahamas.
Can feed it would match our current import.
Okay.
254 of green peppers.
Okay.
380 of bananas. We can do that. You
That's
take
reasonable.
20 farms of 20 acres each. Again, small farms. We're not talking these 1,000-acre farms or tens of thousands of acres as they're talking about now up in in Andrews. We're talking a bunch of smaller ones. But for that to work, the farmers have to pull together. And that's where BAPA can come into place. I think BAPA, which is Bahamas Agricultural Producers Association, it's a non-government agency that's really meant to be the voice of the farmers. And we've got a bad history of working together. So I think BAPA now is an opportunity for us all. All farmers need to join this organization, and we all then have to put our voice into that. It's a democratically run organization where we can put together our vision for farming in our country. We can't wait for the government.
You can.
We can't expect the government to do it. We come to the government with our vision and say, this is what you need or what we need as legislation to back us up.
Yes.
And here's 2 or 3 proposals. I'm not, we're not all knowing. So here's a couple options that we think would work in our country. So, and then from that carry on with a level of education. We need some good extension officers that are out there taking the information that's available now and taking our farming techniques from techniques that are 50 years old to modern sustainable techniques. So once the farmers can pull together and come up with some clear vision, not too complicated, and then work with the government together, saying here's what we want to do, now back us up. I think then we could see some change.
The days of the big hat, straw hat, and the cutlass is gone.
They finish.
They're gone, right? There's a new genre of Bahamian agriculturalists out there, right? There are people who are going to the College of the Bahamas, spend the 2 years, gone off some of the best universities, got bachelor's, master's degrees, PhD degrees, and have come back and in this country, but who are being stifled because they lack credit or funding to implement what they've learned in university. They lack the policy environment to do some of the things that they would like to do. I was talking to Dr. Robert Taylor. He teaches at the University of Alabama A&M in Huntsville.
All right.
He's the dean of the faculty. He's an eminent soil scientist, right? But he is chomping at the bits. He has in the pipeline a $45 million agricultural project which he wants to introduce in his home. Those are the kinds of opportunities that await this country, but the environment, the policy environment has to be created. See, we got to get away from this idea about the foreigner has all the answers.
Yeah.
Right? And we have to create the environment where the native son feels welcome and is appreciated, and his views are accepted, right? Because the native son outside of his native environment is doing very well, but he has this allegiance to his country, and he wants to come back and show off what he has learned, his skills, and make our country productive and less dependent.
Give me an idea of what these policies look like. Give me an idea of what the proposal from BAPA would look like. What things would be proposed? Obviously, that list of 400 items that you need duty exemptions on would be on there. Mm-hmm. What else needs to be on there for us to get farming, the problem of agriculture solved?
Well, I think one of the things that BAPA is really wants to do is that we need an attitudinal shift. Gone are the days where the ministry was the fount of information. That's no longer the case, right? There needs to be more consultative approach to agriculture.
Okay.
Right? We need to develop a private sector-driven agricultural sector. And the public sector should facilitate the private sector, not dictate. And that is what has been happening.
Yeah. Well, Tim, I'm going to give you the last word.
I do believe that what we need is less policing from the government,
Yes.
and more encouraging, more vision casting, more education. I don't think that they should be giving out free things to the farmers, as far as goods and tools, but the money should be spent in training the farmers, and the money should be spent in bringing in new resources and funding the research. We need some research here about our soil and what's going on. And there are some neat things going on with Stan Smith and Baz Miller down at GRAC, but there's so much more that needs to be done. So I think the shift from just being a department that's policing who gets a permit, who's allowed to do this, who's allowed to do that, to a department that's there to build up and encourage and everybody come and support this vision of we're going to produce this much food in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. That'll be a huge shift in the way the ministry works and the way they interact with farmers.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here first on Citizens Review. There have been studies done that section out how much acres we need to make ourselves sustainable. Somehow, the government ministers and the policymakers haven't gotten to it. I don't know what the problem is, but maybe BAPA got to get their act together to push this thing forward. We'll talk about it some more after this break. Good evening again. This is Citizens Review, and we have some new guests, some young people in agriculture to tell us about the practical application of it. We have Mr. Mark Daniels, who runs the Greenhouse Farmers Market on top of Town Center Mall. You've probably seen it sometimes. And then we have Salima Campbell-Hauber, Dr. Salima Campbell-Hauber, who's going to tell us a bit about tissue culturing and how we make agriculture practical. We're going to start with you, Mark.
Hi.
The farmers market.
Yes.
How is it? Are people responding? Is it working? Is it practical? Do they like the fact that the fruits are fresh and grown in the Bahamas? Give us some insight on that.
Well, the farmers market is working. We first started about a little over 3 months ago, and initially we started on the weekends, and we were selling a majority of what we grow at Lucayan Tropical. So that would be our tomatoes, cucumbers, sweet peppers, and some of our crops from our field production.
Okay.
And as the weeks roll on, you would have certain persons would ask for different items like, hey, you got any pumpkins? Or, hey, you got any papaya? And as more and more persons asked for different items, I felt the pressure
Supply and
to
demand.
supply and demand. There you go. And as we move towards being open 5 days a week, most of our customers learned about us through word of mouth, which suggests to me that a lot of people were impressed by what they found there. And so what I tell most people, and which is the creed that we go by, is that at the farmers market we sell only locally grown, locally made products and produce. Mm-hmm. And so outside of what we sell at Lucayan Tropical, I would source produce from some of the family islands and other local farmers. So we would get our grapefruits from Andres and the corns from Andres. And when you tell people, yeah, man, there's some sweet potato that was grown in Andres, you see their eyes light up and like, oh, man, I got to make some sweet potato bread. And it's that type of response that's encouraging. And as the weeks have gone by, I've seen familiar faces and new faces. But once somebody comes there one time, I'm guaranteed to see them again. And that's because people notice the difference of eating freshly grown, and freshly harvested produce. Mm-hmm. Something that was harvested yesterday as compared to something that was harvested a week ago, shipped in a cooler, sitting in the on the shelf in the grocery store. You can notice the taste. You can notice the feel. And you could sometimes, you could feel the love.
Well, Godfrey Innes always says these Chiquita bananas, they got the color, but they have no taste.
No taste.
Nothing in them. But the bananas at the farmer's market.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Okay, good. Now, Dr. Salima Campbell-Hauber.
Hello.
We visited your facility, we saw your lab, and you do what is called tissue culturing.
Yes.
Now, what is tissue culturing? Break that down so my viewers can understand what that means.
Okay. Plant tissue culture is also called micropropagation, and it is a technology that multiplies or propagates plants in a sterile environment. I have an example here. This is a culture. It's sterile. We don't want bacteria, fungi, viruses to grow inside, so everything in this container is sterile.
Okay.
So we produce plants on a micro scale, starting with a small piece of tissue, be it a single seed or a single bud, and we place it in a sterile environment. It's growing on artificial media. Traditionally we grow plants in soil, in potting media. There's no soil in this container. This artificial media I like to call plant jello.
Yeah, okay. I was going to say it looked like jello and it ain't really moving.
Exactly. It's solidified with a gel-like substance. And this media has all of the nutrients that a plant needs to grow. It also has necessary vitamins, and depending on what we want that piece of tissue to do, if we wanted to grow more branches, more leaves, or more roots, then we would include a particular plant hormone.
Okay. Now, from my understanding, because all of that still sound hyper-technical.
Okay.
If you wanted to start a banana farm, usually Bahamians go to the banana tree, cut a piece of arm off the banana tree, stick it in the ground, and you got you another banana tree.
Yes.
But if you wanted to do a field of 350 acres, which Tim suggests could feed the Bahamas, you would need to somehow get 350 of them arms to cut off.
Exactly. So
350 acres worth.
Right.
So tissue culture, as I understand it, is where you can basically replicate what is necessary to grow more trees quicker.
Exactly.
And all of a sudden, we have a field full of banana trees.
Right. In the laboratory, and these are plantains, micro plantlets. These are small.
Okay,
micro meaning it's very small.
This is
a tissue cultured plantains, and we started with probably 5 plants, and now we're into the hundreds. And in order to get hundreds of banana plants or plantain plants, you would need, first of all, just about that many, and you would need a long period of time. Yes. Whereas in the lab, as you said, the process is sped up significantly. The plant quality is a lot better. The plants are more vigorous. They perform better in the field. And we can have thousands of plants in a matter of months as opposed to several years.
Okay, Mark and Salima, young people in agriculture, as I will deem you. What's the encouragement for young people like yourselves to get in? People go and they get doctorate degrees like yourself, and all of a sudden it doesn't make sense because you can't make back what you put in. But what's the incentive? Why are you involved? You seem like a very sensible individual. You could be doing any other things. Any number of things. Of course, you're not in the field picking cotton like a lot of people think of when they think of agriculture. What can you tell us as to why you got in?
Well, I started on that traditional route of I did my sciences in high school, did my science degree in the College of the Bahamas and in UWI, and I came back home and I was headed straight for the medical field. So, I had doctor written all over me. My family was proud. Everyone loved me. Not saying that there's anything wrong with the medical field. It's just I always felt more at peace around the plants. And I actually started to volunteer in Salima's lab doing some of the tissue culture while I was working at a local hospital for a few months. And for me, it was just the fact that waking up and coming to the greenhouse getting choked up. It's really emotional. Just the fact that waking up in the morning to come to the greenhouse didn't feel like work every day. It was a joy to come and see the plants. And you feed off of the energy of the plants. When you come into the greenhouse and all the plants are happy and, they depend on you just as much as you depend on them. So what you put in, you will get out. And that's really what it's been for me. And, hey, I'm stuck.
You sound just similar to me, where it was assumed that I would come home and I would be this lawyer and I'd start my firm. And I mean, I just reject that. I think young people in the Bahamas need to know that we don't need. I had an uncle tell me that my degrees were too social. Trading that.
No.
And so you've been receiving the same kind of pressure, which I'm sure most of our young people feel, but they can understand that there are other paths that we can take, and you could create your own path.
Definitely.
Citizens Review is an example of that. I took my political science and classical civilization degrees and became innovative with it for commentary.
Right.
So young people in agriculture, now you have a doctorate. Yours is a bit different. You went all the way to the end. How does yours work?
Well, my story is very practically the identical story to Mark. I enjoyed sciences in high school, and I felt the need to. I learned about the high food bill that our country was the amount of monies we were spending importing food. And I just felt strongly led to help chop away at that. There was no need that we should be spending hundreds of millions of dollars importing food. So from my love of sciences did not end. They continued, only rather than the human body or animals, I study plants. And I get the same enjoyment, the same challenges from studying plants as I would have under less stress, I'm sure, than in the medical profession. And talking about showing our young people that there are other avenues.
Yes.
We both were on the medical track, but now we find great enjoyment in agriculture. Horticulture is just one arm. In this whole field of agriculture, we need, in this country, plant pathologists. We need plant breeders. We need people who are doing molecular biology. The earlier segment talked about research that needs to go on in our country in order to make agriculture more successful and more efficient. Other professions, we need people in the business side too. For many years, the farmers who, of old, they struggle with marketing their produce and getting their produce to market, depending on the packing house system, which we know is not working very well.
Yes.
So we need people, we need business folks as well as scientists. So if you are studying literature, if you are studying biology with chemistry, if you are studying accounting, you can find a job in this industry.
Amen. Well, that's a wrap for young people in agriculture. You heard it here, that you don't have to be a doctor, lawyer, politician, and a priest. You could be anything you want to be, as long as you push yourself and try. We'll be back right after this break to see a young person doing some other great stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Citizens Review. This is our Citizens Arrest portion of the show, but we have a special treat. We have Mr. Andre Moncur, who is going to do a spoken word piece for us about Bahamian citizens. Before I get to that, I want to talk about Freeport. Boy, Grand Bahamians, we really can't catch a break, but that's okay. Help and hope is on the way, and it's not going to come in the form of these lousy politicians. We'll get our act together and start helping ourselves at some point. Now, back to Mr. Moncur. He's a St. Anne's student. He's under the tutelage of the excellent, great, wonderful Freeport Superintendent, Ms. Valencia Sanders, and he's going to give us a piece talking about Bahamians. This citizen's arrest is on us. If we want national sovereignty, we got to work for it. That means our attitudes have to change, and we got to get our act together. Andre Moncur, citizen's arrest. Let's go.
There's just this pain inside of me, flowing through these veins inside of me, living in a nation where pain and sorrow are Siamese twins of a mother that we call society, who also has a daughter working the slaughter order. All her little nephews and cousins, no wait, her niece, who ain't got no place to stay but always find somewhere to sleep and someone to sleep with. Mini skirts sneaking Narawaki every evening. Then the man start dreaming, no, the man start seeking. Hey, wait, Look here, honey, you looking a little bummy. What would you do for some money? Then she thought about her mummy, once champion bubbler, real life struggler, now AIDS disease smuggler. He knew it from the start that it was all a kind of art. Just paint a picture filled with green and then her legs would spread apart. Or am I just a teeny weeny tad bit fool? Is she a little bit confused or a whole lot abused? Cause there's no reconciliation for major deterioration. Cause the answer to the flagrant isn't naked. It's hidden in this evil generation, really cancer to the nation. It's like we stuck in Hell's Kitchen without a mitten or an apron. Stirring up a huge pot of good old evil. Once whips for the slave masters, now lies for the pastor who harasses young Allison, telling the girl's parents that their daughter needs counseling. I'd lost to the count again. Cause you see, these people, these Bahamian people, one minute they cry for God, next minute they doing evil. This one say he's spiritual, time we know he lying, why he acts so hypocritical. Ridiculous individual. And someone gotta set an example for young Mariah, who acquires lunch money from pleasing a bus driver who drops off to school with a fake heart, real smile. Meanwhile, Tina bragging about how she got an MP on speed dial. That's the kind of stuff y'all selling. You have 2 kids, and how old you is? You 11? And we ain't safe. Police getting shoot from their own tools and weapons. Want to drive a big Mercedes? Just tell the bank that you's a reverend. But you see these people, these Bahamian people, remember Sodom and Gomorrah? We could turn into the sequel. For me, I believe that we could change this whole life that we're living, whatever happened to, following in the footsteps of Celine and Pinland, Samilo Butler, A.D. Hanna, even our one and only Jesus, I guess. Being a heathen is the reason for the season. Doubt it. These people, these Bahamian people, I believe that we could do it if we act as one people. One people now, hey, even one people forever. One people forward, upward, onward, together. You see, these ain't just people. These might be Bahamian people. We have a legacy. Let's not turn this Bahama line into a memory. Thank you.
Amen. Ladies and gentlemen, that's our show for the week. You've been watching Citizens Review. Have a nice weekend. That was good, man.